Hello and welcome everybody to our webinar partnered by Vertex. My name is Caroline Dillon. I manage content for procurement leaders, and today I am absolutely delighted to be joined by an amazing panel. So who do we have? We have Les Jackson, director at Deloitte. Les Jackson offers his clients more than 20 years of experience dedicated to sales, use tax, VAT, and global tax transformation. He is also a leading authority in indirect tax automation and has significant experience in global finance and P2P transformation programs, and is leading the design and delivery of innovative tax solutions. We also have Kristen Schwabenbauer, partner manager at Vertex. So Kristen has been helping Vertex clients turn their goals into reality for nearly 20 years. In her current role, she manages Vertex relationships with procurement-focused organizations such as Ariba and Cooper. With these efforts, she looks to build the most robust integrations that meets clients' needs and expectations. And these evolving dynamics of the industry's wide efforts is creating a great opportunity for the Vertex clients. So today, what are we going to be discussing? Today, we are going to be exploring what key considerations organizations should be considering when deploying a tax solution for their procurement system. We will be looking at how to integrate tax compliance requirements within a P2P model. We will be looking at best practices to effectively deploy a tax solution for your procurement system. And we will be looking also at what the implications are for how you structure your team and your strategy. So before I hand over to our panelists, I would like to draw your attention to the icons that you can see on your screen. The two main important ones are the help icon and the Q&A icon. If you have any technical issues whatsoever, please click on our help icon. We'll do our best to help you out. And if you have any questions for our audience, please use the, for our panelists, please use the Q&A icon. Don't wait until the end of the session. We really want to hear from you. We want this as interactive as possible. So, Kristen, Les, we good to go? Yeah?
Good to go.
Brilliant. So, guys, I was thinking what would be great is if we could maybe start by offering our audience some context and, help position our topic a little bit. So, Kristen, maybe let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks, Caroline. Great introduction. Appreciate it. Happy to be here. And I think we probably put this in context, especially because we're talking to procurement professionals, and they're probably like, "Why are we talking about tax?" Well, we want to build some awareness here. So we actually have been doing this for probably about 2 years now at Vertex. Vertex, in case you don't know, is a tax technology organization, a global organization. So we offer tax technology and tax technology services to help enable companies and organizations, tax professionals with like the tools and everything that they can help your companies be compliant, remain compliant, control everything, manage everything, make sure that you're calculating the right VAT or the right sales tax, as well as remitting it. So the full flight there of all of what your tax professionals, experience, we look to really support. So behind the scenes, we may be calculating tax on, purchases if you're making, purchases at Best Buy, or if you're working with, ordering something off of Amazon or Apple or anyone like that. Vertex is oftentimes behind the scenes in helping to make sure that you're being charged as a consumer the right sales tax, but then also helping companies to make sure that, hey, and from a purchasing standpoint, hey, are my suppliers charging me the right VAT or the right sales tax, things like that when we're making purchases. So we are all about really empowering our tax professionals. And now as things are evolving in this industry and there's procurement transformations going on, we really want to reach out to procurement professionals to say, hey guys, we want to empower you too. We want to empower your AP folks to make sure that they're not, they're not making tax decisions because they don't have to. There are tools out there to enable and help and assist. So that's really what we're all about as a company. We've been in business for over 40 years. And recently, about a year ago, we went public. So lots of exciting things happening, lots of crazy dynamic things happening, especially over the past, year or so with COVID. So some really good things that we're gonna talk about here. And then also, Les, do you want to give some explanation as well?
Sure. Thanks, Kristen. So I think you just helped highlight some of the critical topics that we're going to talk about today. And I think from a Deloitte's perspective is that we help our clients and we help our targets that are in the market that are looking to I call it automate. And a lot of times the tax aspects of a procure to pay transformation, the last mile almost is the tax technology and the automation of tax. And where that comes into play oftentimes is even upstream of those processes. So we're going to talk today about the end-to-end process of purchasing all the way to invoice posting into an ERP system. But what's important here to understand is that there's a lot of technology that's available in the market. The real value case here is around looking at your overall organization's tax profile. That's what we do at Deloitte. We help clients determine where they have either pain points in a process currently, or where they have challenges with accuracy around indirect taxes, sales and use tax, Canadian, PST, GST, and VAT around the world globally. What we do is bridge the gap between the technology, the process, and the data. And many times in a purchasing organization, there's a lot of different buyers, right, that are impacting the downstream, effectiveness of a tool such as Ariba, Coupa, TradeShift, and those other implementation softwares that are in the marketplace. And what we do is try to help bridge the gap between here's how tax, needs to work and the process that is impacting the tax accuracy. And so a lot of times there's purchasing buyers, there's invoicing receipts, there's posting of accounting records that are happening into a financial system. We look at each one of those points in the process, make sure that we have the right data set to do taxes appropriately, that we are streamlining the process so that the tax, evaluation, if you will, is not manual, and that we're not having to institute something, in a business unit that's not familiar with how taxes, need to apply around the world globally. So we try to make those things less of a pain point and automate as much as possible where we can with clients through the purchasing organization, through the payables organization, and ultimately getting tax accurate in the system, but pushing that back into the finances of the business. That's the end-to-end solution that we bring to our clients.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys, and thank you for offering us this little overview. So I think, one of the first areas that I'd like us to touch upon today, and Les, you mentioned it, is the indirect tax. Okay, so let's start with that. Essentially, why should procurement care about indirect tax in the P2P process, and why is indirect tax in procurement so critical? So Kristen, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. It's evolving. It's a very dynamic area. I think, like it or not, tax is a critical part of, our world. We've seen this, especially with COVID and the relief packages and things like that. But it's a critical part about running a business, and a lot of people think of, tax, or procurement professionals might be thinking tax or thinking withholding tax or sales tax. But procurement is really becoming more strategic, and that's been slowly evolving with, your Aribas and your Coupas, and they're becoming these major, almost ERPs, if you will, for your procurement professionals to manage everything. Then, it's just really critical to understand that tax is a part of that. It really touches everything. So, and unfortunately, procurement folks might not be thinking about, are we being charged the right tax, or should we be self-accruing tax, or, what are we doing with reverse charges? But all of these things, if you're looking to go through a procurement transformation and really look at KPIs and performance indicators and things like that and gain efficiencies, then one of those things that you need to review is really tax, because that could really mess up everything. And it's a critical part. It's risky for the organization, because if you're not paying tax, or you're not, self-accruing and things like that, then you could be putting yourself at risk for audits. But it also really can help, can support the bottom line. And there's a lot of accounting implications as well. So it's not quite as straightforward as what we would say in the US, like the sales tax side of things, or VAT on the customer side. That seems to be pretty straightforward, and people kind of understand it. This indirect tax and procurement is a lot more complicated. And that's why, we have folks like Les at Deloitte, where they really, sometimes the technology isn't always there, but you've got to still come up with and make sure that tax is getting what they need. And that, your procurement professionals also, have their tools that they need, and they're not relying too much on tax. So there's tools and there's things like that in place, and processes we can put in place that can all help support it. And that's, really important, I think, to recognize. Les?
Yeah. I think Kristen makes some good points. What I would say is you almost look at, a lot of us have, a business to consumer experience where we go out to, certain portals and sites, and we're able to interact with those sites, and we buy things as a consumer, right? Businesses are no different, right? And I think businesses just do things at scale and have the availability then to be able to really automate their process, right? Around how you buy, what spend is, most applicable to the organization. Do we have discounts and things of that nature that we can get through bulk buying channels? Those are all aspects of, and KPIs as far as the purchasing organization goes, very critical to the business, saves the business money overall. And I would say when it comes to the tax aspect, a lot of us look at it, if we buy something, on a website, we're like, oh, they charge me the applicable amount of tax. For the business, business to business transactions, really no different there. It's just that there's, a constant kind of ebb and flow. And when you're talking about the global purchasing organization, there's a lot of different rules and aspects to tax that, even if as a tax professional, even if I say, hey, here's a sheet of paper and here's what the tax rules are today in country ABC, those tax rules can change over time. And certainly the business and the profile of the organization can change as well, right? Just because, we do business in 5 countries today, somebody may say, hey, we want to open our markets into different other suppliers in different areas of the world as well. That just adds to the overall tax profile of the company, right? And where it comes, for tax professionals, they are kind of in a blind spot a bit, because they're like, okay, we're purchasing from lots of different suppliers. The suppliers, in a lot of cases, they have either sophistication, around their technology and process to invoice taxes to their customers, but at the same time, they may not have an obligation to collect those taxes. So, there's an ebb and a flow there between the supplier and the customer, and that's always going to be the case. And I think tax is one of those critical areas where a lot of organizations look at it and go, what, am I, getting the tax right at the time of the transaction, or am I having to, face that as a exception process that I have to go back and look at after the fact? And I think what we're akin to here is it's much more value, for the organization to get it right at the time of the transaction, right? When it's flowing through a procurement system, let's make sure that, we're interfacing with our supplier. We're obviously telling the supplier, hey, if you're charging us too much from an aspect of the material price, or you're charging us too much from a freight perspective or whatever, we're always coming back and having those interactions. I think tax is really, no different there, right? We want to be able to interact with those suppliers and help them understand, yeah, you're charging us the right amount of tax for the right reasons. We're paying either that tax over to you, or if you don't have an obligation to collect it, we're going to self-assess on our own where we're liable for it. I think that's the real interactions that we're talking about here, not just the technology, right? But being able to help get suppliers and customers a better answer.
Yeah, definitely. And, you guys kind of nailed it on the head. Obviously, this is a critical topic, and it needs to be properly thought through. There needs to be a real strategy and thinking behind it. And I guess there's the argument, yes, okay, it happens under transaction, but obviously tax should, be considered at the beginning of the organization's procurement transformation, realistically. So I was wondering if you guys could expand a little bit on that, on the why this really should be that priority right at the beginning. And Les, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So, what I would say is it's really, there's multiple angles to why taxes should be considered at the beginning. One, I kind of hit on some of the aspects of, interactions with your supplier base, right? And helping to inform that, there's certain tax obligations that either your company has or taxes that you're going to pay over as part of that invoicing process. I think that's important, but the real, benefit here is to getting the most accuracy and the most, I'll call it, automation, right? When I look at clients' tax profiles globally, many times I wouldn't say, we don't build out systems to automate 100% of their processes, right? We look at it and take a perspective of, what's the high value items? Where is it that we, where we could have gaps in how much taxes that we actually assess or that are due? And many times, companies make large technology purchases, right? And the way that the technology, just buying an ERP system or licensing software, right? Those are big major purchases for organizations. You want to get the taxes right. And to do that, you got to know a lot about that transaction. You got to know that business or that user story. And so, to answer your question, Caroline, I think it's important that you map out those business scenarios and you say at the beginning of a procurement transformation, these are the types of scenarios that we have, and here's the high value ones. And you kind of look at those as a priority. You probably do that from a purchasing organization perspective, but you also do that with a tax perspective on it, because there's certain transactions that really can get the, I would say, have higher value when it comes to tax accuracy, when it comes to the dollar amounts of taxes involved. If you got a lot of penny transactions, yeah, those add up over time. But if you got hundreds of thousands of dollars, in certain transactions, those are big dollar values that you want to make sure the taxes are right. When you're talking about 20% or of a VAT on a particular invoice transaction, that's a big dollar value. You want to get that right. So I think the commodity management, understanding we call it the spend taxonomy, understanding the types of goods and services that are going to be procured through a particular system, and rationalizing that with, okay, we have taxability decisions on these goods and service transactions. How do we determine what type of taxability decision needs to apply? And then, as I mentioned before, what jurisdictions are involved, right? Because we've got origins and destinations for different transactions. We have certain amounts of VAT, or we have certain amounts of sales and use tax that we would expect on those transactions based on the types of spend, based on the types of jurisdictions involved, and ultimately, is there any tax due, right? Either from the supplier perspective or from the buyer side. So those are the types of things that I think you have to evaluate as you talk about a procurement transformation, right? And then you funnel that into how you automate that. But the business scenarios and we call them user stories are very important to identify up front.
Definitely. And
Kristen, anything?
What are your thoughts on this? Sorry, guys.
Yeah, no, a lot of really, really good points. Yeah, I think, what we've heard from clients, from major clients of ours, is that they were the tax professionals, even a very high level, like a VP of tax, were the last to know that their company was engaging on this, a procurement, an Ariba implementation or something like that. And they're playing catch up, because they're like, well, what are we going to do now? So I think, it makes a lot of sense. And we experience that a lot. But I mean, the best time to, work tax into this, to something like this, any implementation. I mean, you can go from SAP ECC to S4HANA or something like that. You want the implementations really run in parallel. And so that you can, you're going to sit in a room, or ideally a room when we get back to it, and gather all of the requirements. So how are we doing things now, and how do we want to be doing things, and what's wrong and what's broken? And that's some of the stuff that really Les is talking about, and what companies like Deloitte really do well at helping clients out. It's like, let's take a look, whether you call that scoping or blueprinting or what have you, but that's a very important step that lays the foundation for your implementation and ultimately your success. You might not be able to automate every single thing the way that you would want to. That's, I think, oftentimes the case, but you can try to automate as much as possible and then plan accordingly for things where, hey, maybe we need to have reports coming out of here, or, things like that. All of those things can be put in place, and it's better to do that at the beginning than at the very end where, oh no, we have to, someone said, oh, we're doing Coupa implementation, and oh gosh, we have to do a custom integration to third-party tax, to a Vertex. What are we going to do? That blows your implementation timelines, out of the water. So I think, being as proactive as possible is going to help you get the best overall solution, and automate, as much as possible. So that's, part of the reasons why we're doing this is just to educate and get people comfortable talking about this, and making sure that they can raise their hand in those meetings and say, hey, have we thought about this? Or are we working with Deloitte and doing this? That kind of a thing. So I think, all of those reasons are really, important for people to start to really address and take in as part of your procurement transformations. Caroline? Yeah,
definitely. And, we've got a couple of questions there from the audience guys that actually fit quite well. Obviously, Les, you were kind of talking about like that penny difference, so to speak. And, John from our audience would like to know what are your thoughts in terms of a dollar threshold, matching tax perfectly, and when does this become important? So what are your thoughts on this, Les?
Yeah, so I'll address that. I think this is a perfect, case in point for, you've got automation, now, hey, there's a difference in the amount that the supplier invoices us from an indirect tax perspective versus what we say in our ecosystem the tax amount should be, right? We've got Vertex plugged in and it tells us, hey, this is the tax amount that we should be expecting. What I often run into is okay, at that point in time where we're doing that invoice reconciliation, and we haven't touched on, exactly all the points yet where tax decisions are made in the procurement process, but invoice reconciliation, when you're kind of comparing, the amounts of tax charged by the supplier versus what we say internally, there's thresholds that you can set up. And we'd see that on the ERP side for years, right? There was percentage or dollar-based thresholds. We see that now with Ariba and Coupa and other systems in the procurement space, right? If you're pulling data from, an invoicing process that has been, either scanned in, or you're pulling it in from an Ariba network, let's say, and that's going into your Ariba system, at that point in time, you're going to compare the dollar values. And what I would say is that you can either kick things out in a very kind of stringent way, and you can say, hey, you know what, if it's off, then we want to send it to the tax, for a tax review. Or you can say, you know what, let's set up some tolerances, we call them, and evaluate, what those tolerances should be. I don't have a hard and fast rule on, dollar value of threshold, but I do think that we see our clients do set some level of a tolerance at that point in time in the process, so that they're not evaluating every transaction, right? They're looking to see, okay, what are the major transactions that may have tax that's off. Kristen, you want to add to that?
Definitely.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and it really goes back to each individual organization and what their level of risk is, what their tolerance is for that. So I think the key is, and I know, Les, you and I experienced this a couple years ago with some implementations where, everything was getting flagged, and then there was 20, 30,000 invoices to be reviewed. You do not want to do that. Like, you are moving backwards if that happens, right? So something's wrong. So, whether it's $5, $10, whatever. And then a lot of times tax on the back end of things where, you've got credits and balances and things like that, where you might be able to, take things into consideration when you're going to file your returns, if you will, and reconcile things that way. So, again, I think it really goes back to your organization and what your rules are. And that's like, a finance purchasing tax kind of decision that needs to be made, while you want to keep in mind, of course, speed and automation and things like that. And I think the key is hopefully the companies that you're and the vendors that you're working with do have some processes in place where, oh, this can get flagged, right, and be reviewed by a tax manager or someone else, and then there's follow up. But hopefully it's limited.
Yeah, definitely. And guys, we're getting quite a lot of questions from our audience, regarding essentially the different kind of levels, a tax solution should be, integrated at, if that makes sense, or estimated. And I was wondering, maybe just to kind of help answer all of these questions, if you guys could take us through maybe what the key touch points are, in the procure to pay process, just to kind of help our audience a little bit, with all of these different levels and the timings and everything like that. And Les, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. So I'm gonna speak, from a touch point perspective, but also, a little bit on specifics to Ariba and Vertex, how those systems interact. What I'll say is that there's really 3 to 4 touch points with tax. Many times what we see is upstream in the purchasing process, right? So purchase requisition in Ariba, let's say, you're going to create a purchase requisition. When you do that requisition process, there's a natural, it's called a tax API. There's a natural interface point out to a Vertex tax calculation engine. And so the requisition is when, we create, these are the spend items that we're looking to buy. The buyer's putting that on the requisition, and that information is then transmitted, if you will, to Vertex. Vertex comes back with the tax rate, tax amount type of information back to the Ariba system. So it's the requisition time that does get copied into a purchase order, right? So that information gets just transferred into the Ariba purchase order, let's say, and a lot of times that's the first interaction with tax. Now, do we expect that is a hard and fast, determination of tax at that point? It's an estimation, right? And, I have varying degrees of clients that say, hey, I love to have the estimation up front. I love to know it, at least in my buying and my spend organization. Hey, there's, 10% more, spend here on this transaction because of tax. A lot of companies like to plan for that. I have, varying degrees of clients that say, hey, you know what? I then want to tell the supplier that this is the amount of tax I'm expecting. That doesn't always happen, right, at all, right? Some clients say, hey, yeah, I'd like to tell the supplier that and give that information to them. Other times clients say, you know what, it doesn't really make a difference to me. Regulatory-wise, I don't know of a jurisdiction really, maybe with the exception of a couple globally, where they have some expectation to see tax at that early stage, right, on a purchase order, let's say. So, there's very limited, information as far as a regulatory perspective. But then if you process that on through the transaction flow, like I mentioned before, you get to an invoicing reconciliation, right? An invoice comes in from the supplier. That's the real final call for a tax determination from a Vertex perspective. That point in time is when we're going to book, if you will, a tax entry. And so, Vertex is able to record, if you will, the tax incident once it's kind of an submitted invoicing process, and that's also what you'll use then to push to your financial ERP system, right? You may say, hey, this is an amount of tax that we've already calculated and we want to push it. And if it's tax that we're paying to a supplier, let's say, and in other cases you may say, you know what? At that invoice and reconciliation time, we have an exception, and we want to push that out to a queue. We want to look at this this invoice before we finalize that for payment. So I think that's the kind of the last and final call to the tax system. And then you always have the opportunity to push this transaction, for payment into an ERP. Most of our clients, that's the profile, right? They're going to push it out of Ariba and it's going to go to ERP for their financial treasury function. And when they do that, there's, booking into the finances of the general ledger for the company. And if you do have a self-assessment, some clients say, hey, at that point in time, I may want to interact with the tax engine again at my ERP point to say, hey, you know, I need to self-assess some tax if no tax was paid to a supplier, as an example. So that's kind of the end-to-end integration points with the tax solution. And that's how you kind of evaluate, you know, where you need to have taxes and what amount of tax is, you know, accurate at what point in time. Kristen, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I mean, a lot of really good points. I think, you know, when I talk to folks and try to break it down, you hit all the, you have purchase requisition, you have purchase order, you have invoice reconciliation, you have final submission. A lot of this, if we equate it to being a consumer, a lot of the, you know, the first 3 points are really quotes, if you will, from Vertex's perspective, right? You're just kind of like, hey, Vertex, what do you think based on how we have it configured? You know, can we, you know, are they close? And then the final, okay, we're ready to pay, invoice submission, you know, that gets locked down. Do we self-accrue? Do we just pay the tax? Are we within the threshold? You know, all those final decisions are made, and then that transaction is really locked. It's like placing an order, you know, online. It's locked in stone. So, and I think there's different varying degrees of, like, if you look at like an SAP or an Oracle, where they're older, more mature, you know, systems and companies, they have all of that functionality there. It's just there. When you're talking about your best of breeds, where your Aribas and your Coupas and your trade shifts, all of this stuff is really evolving for them. So you may have some of it, but you might not have all of it. So that might lead you back and going back to, hey, have early discussions with tax. Okay, well, what are we going to do? Maybe we should do some more of this stuff out of the ERP. Maybe we can run more of this stuff through the invoices through Coupa. What options do we have? You know, what are we buying? Is it for indirect or is it for direct spend? All of those factors go in. And then, you know, and last I'm going to call you on this, things are changing as these providers expand. You know, you look at Ariba, they're pulling in Fieldglass and Concur into one major platform. Coupa is I think it's Coupa Pay if I'm right, but you're going to be able to pay invoices out of Coupa. So then what do? You have to strategically look at these implementations as not just a straight point like, okay, Coupa to Vertex. It's going to be SAP, Coupa, Vertex, or Vertex is right in the middle. And oh no, what do we do? Because there could be some things there that you mess up. So it's more of an enterprise type of implementation. And that's really where you have to focus to make sure you don't break anything along the way and you have everything covered. Because then, you know, you could potentially, and I've spoken to a lot of companies, will say, well, Coupa isn't 100% great at this. We want to use Bassware. Where do we integrate? You know, so they might have multiple purchasing systems as well. So it's just, you know, awareness and making sure that you're asking the right questions and having these conversations, because it does get pretty gosh darn complicated. Carolyn?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, talking about kind of asking the right questions, I think we've got a really interesting question here from the audience, from Annie, asking, should there be a team assigning commodity codes at the beginning of the procurement process, and who should be involved in that decision making? I think that's, you know, quite an important question, because quite often, you know, the question of ownership does come up, and that can create confusion, really. So, I mean, Les, maybe you want to give your thoughts on that one.
I would love to, Caroline. So I think this is a perfect example of how tax can be integrated into a purchasing transformation or procurement process. So what we see is that, you know, many companies, there's nothing new from a purchasing perspective, right? I mean, all companies, unless they're a brand new organization, right? They've got a process, they've set up, you know, the system and the commodities that they buy. And what I think, you know, to help people understand is, you know, anytime you're buying certain goods and services, there's a taxability determination on those goods or services. Doesn't matter what system we're using, right? So the fact is that the commodity structure is very important to have a tax savvy person look at it to understand and help, you know, the rest of the organization understand where they need some granularity, right? I'll just give you an example. I kind of alluded to software purchases earlier. I think it's kind of an easy one for us to think about. Software, you know, in a global organization, it can be delivered in many different ways. Most of the time nowadays, it's cloud. It's electronically, you know, delivered to to the organization. And what we would say is like there's different tax rules depending on the country, depending on some of the states in the U.S. around the taxation of electronically delivered software. So you can imagine we have to know, we can't just have a commodity category that says, I don't know, ERP software, or we can't have a commodity code that just says, financial application software. We need a commodity code that tells us, hey, yeah, it's software, but it's also, electronically delivered as an example, right? That's something that from a tax perspective, that's granularity that the organization needs. So when you're looking at the commodity groups and you think about how you're organizationally, how you're going to assign those commodity groups, a lot of times, again, I would make sure that you have a tax advisor that's helping you there. And when it comes down to that, a lot of times the internal, your tax department, they may have some expertise in the area. Certainly it's something we do at Deloitte. Oftentimes we have, our tax professionals that look at the commodities and can help rationalize where there needs to be some more granularity there. And I think that's really important, because if you don't think of the commodities that way, you'll get, a high level tax decision that may not give you the accuracy that you need. And it'll just become a bigger pain point, because then you're like, okay, we don't know how this software, is ultimately delivered. That is going to cause us to have some tax liabilities. And then we've got risk to the organization, right? Then they've got to come back, and at some point they've got to, under audit, they're going to have to defend that. So I think that's just an example for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Kristen, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Caroline. I was going to mention, that's some of the reason why you want to implement a third-party tax under like a Vertex, because there's work and things like that need to be determined. How you're going to handle your commodity codes and the assignment and everything else that Deloitte and folks can help you with. There's what Vertex does is we research all the rates and the rules and things like that for global content, and then we deliver it to you. So what happens is then, during your initial implementation, you're looking at our rules and, our categories and things like that and saying, okay, well, can we just map? It just becomes a mapping exercise. Do we agree with Vertex? So then, if anything changes, Vertex can handle it. But you're calculating the right way. I mean, the idea is really let the engine do as much of the work for you as possible, right? So, it's key, and at least you have that extra help. It's not just a dumb tax calculator. It is a very intelligent tool that's going to allow you to help support making those very intricate details, and then even testing them out and things like that. So you have that, and that's one of the real benefits.
Brilliant. And we've got a good follow-up question here from Aubrey regarding these commodity groups. And, they're asking, are these something that, can be relied on? You've touched upon it a little bit just now there, Kristen, but are these something that can be relied on vendors or suppliers for? Should, companies use their own? Like, what would be your advice, in terms of managing this? Kristen, maybe we can start with you.
I'd actually like to hear what Les has to say based on his experience.
Fair enough. Sorry.
No, that's great.
Go ahead.
That's great. Thanks, Kristen. So, what I would say is there's a UNSPC codes, and without getting into too much of a tangent here, that's an international, goods and service commodity description indicator, right? And a lot of companies, are looking to move towards kind of that standardization, right? And use that as their commodity indicators, if you will. I think, so from a supplier customer's perspective, as long as both of you are on the same page with that, right? Both of you are thinking about it. Hey, this is a harmonized, group of codes that we're using to classify the commodities that we're interfacing with. But to answer your question, I don't look to the suppliers to handle that. I would say it's still on the, on the buyer side to say, hey, these are the types of commodities and spend that we have. And a lot of times that's for purposes internally, right, to manage the spend of the company. And so I think the commodity managers and others kind of look at it, hey, this is our master data, right? This is the data set that we want to use for goods and services. And whether or not that's UNSPCs or that's some other type of coding scheme, what I would say is the critical point is just to have a tax analysis of that, right? So Again, it goes back to doing the analysis and then saying, okay, how does this map to what we have on the Vertex side to be able to give us the most accurate tax answer, right? So I do think that there's the analysis up front and making sure you've got the right goods and service categories. And then it's the mapping, as Kristen mentioned, to the Vertex tax engine.
Yeah, definitely. And, I want to kind of, take us back a little bit, because obviously we've talked about, the different touch points. We've talked about, the criticality and the strategy behind it. But, what I would quite like to look at is obviously, not just procurement, the whole world has been undergoing so much change and transformation due to, the pandemic and COVID. And I was wondering how, keeping in mind everything we've discussed so far, how has indirect tax in procurement changed really since COVID? What have you seen? And maybe Les, we can start with you.
Yeah, I would say since, and I would say work from home, right? Since more of us in the tax world have worked, primarily from our home offices for over a year, I think it's made the world a smaller place, right? So it gives us an opportunity to interact with our colleagues globally. And I think in ways that maybe a lot of us in organizations, didn't have to rely upon before, right? So we have a lot of technology now where we have, capabilities, video technology capabilities to make the world a smaller place, get people into meetings, right? Now I would say there's a lot of, hangover from that, because we have a lot of meetings on our calendars every day where we use a lot of technology, right? And I think all of us would say that, it's been a challenge from that respect. But at the same time, I think for the tax organization, for the procurement organization, it's given us an opportunity here really to collaborate and given us more, I would say, flexibility in how we work on a day-to-day basis. So the work from home, I think, has changed some things. I think it's given us, from a pure transformation perspective, it's given us a bit more focus on the business process in my mind, right? The technology tools, they're always evolving, they're getting better and better. But I think the business process side of any one of these transformations is really key. And so that's all about the people, right? And I think that helps us understand, when we look at business process, Caroline, I think that helps us understand, here's the things that we need to do to educate and inform our audience, right? Our colleagues in the organization. They may not be that aware of tax requirements. I think that's the first side from a tax perspective. I think on the procurement side, a lot of folks are saying, hey, you know what? I want to be able to buy things. I want to be able to do that globally. I need to be able to, have a simple technology tool to be able to do that. Coupa, Ariba, TradeShift, those are all great, opportunities for the organization. But then it becomes, okay, how do I make this, seamless as possible? Seamless is a tricky word in my world, right? Because seamless, what does that mean? Does that mean, hey, I'm going to go and click, I'm going to have, an Amazon type experience when I go and buy something in an organization? If that's what it means, then we got to automate the tax function. We don't need people involved in that tax determination process. And that's what I'd say. Work from home is really kind of, added to the business process side of things and making sure that we understand how this really needs to work.
Actually, Les, I'm quite happy that you mentioned, that word seamless. And Kristen, I'll move it on. I'll put this one to you. We've got a question from Susie that kind of does match that a little bit, because her question is very much looking at, currently they have Ariba for purchasing quote, Vertex as a tax engine, and SAP for ERP, and every single party talks to each other, makes assessments on a monthly basis. And, just reading the question, it does sound like quite a lot of back and forth. And she was wondering how can, this monthly manual work can be avoided essentially and be more efficient. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Susie, and we're well familiar with your organization, and you've always asked really, really good questions. It's something to really take into consideration. If you're using Ariba, I have said, and I know folks, when I worked with Ariba more closely, they said you don't use Ariba without third-party tax. Help make sure you have that connected and have that set up so that you have that extra support. But then you do also have to factor in, okay, well, what happens with SAP and what happens with that OK to pay file import into SAP? And if you're using a Vertex with SAP, that's something to be taken into consideration to make sure that you're not, double calculating or double assessing or anything like that, and can you turn the right things off in SAP, or what are you doing like from a legal entity standpoint? So it's conversations like that, and definitely pull in a Deloitte for those conversations to really break it out, and get everyone kind of in the room or on a web meeting to talk through those things. But there's definitely efficiencies that you can gain. Les, do you have anything you want to add on that one?
I mean, I think that's right on point. Looking at the picture holistically, right, and just making sure that each one of the aspects of the organization, the business functions, understand their roles. And I'll tell you, many times even in this day and age, I've been surprised at how many global organizations really rely upon an invoice processor. I'll call it to tax code a transaction. And that's still a process that's out there. And in my humble opinion, I think that's something that we don't have to rely upon anymore, right? We've got a lot of capability now that we just didn't have in the past. And I think it's also, like I think Caroline mentioned before, there's different systems, right? Kristen, I think you brought that up too. There's different systems at play here, right? And depending on the type of transaction flow, we may have people and processes in different places where we have a tax integration point. And that's something that is only going to proliferate, right? Just as the technology evolves, as different systems come on board that do things, specific to certain business functions, I think that's going to continue. There's no doubt. I mean, everybody says, hey, I want one kind of, golden environment, but most of the clients, multinationals, that's not the case, right? They have many different systems, and that's just going to continue. I don't really think that's really contracting.
Yeah, I agree with that, Les. I mean, that's something that we've seen quite a bit, in the discussions with our members, that there is that constant issue of, there's no one size fits all. Realistically, you need to find what's right for you and for your organization, realistically. And but kind of keeping that in mind, we have discussed quite a bit all of like the different points and the different strategies and things like that. And one of the things that does come back quite a bit, when we discuss with our members is also, and we did kind of briefly touch upon this at the beginning of the session, is that supplier management, if that makes sense. We're managing the relationship with the supplier, and obviously, it's become clear from the session that tax and thinking about tax is incredibly important. But what are your thoughts on this? And I'm thinking, COVID has changed things a lot, and in how we deal with that management with the suppliers, and how we deal with also, the transparency aspect of things. So I know this is quite a loaded question, but I'm quite curious to hear your thoughts on how would you go about it, and what have you seen in the market in terms of managing that relationship? And maybe, Les, we can go with you, and then Kristen.
So the relationship with the supplier type of thing, Caroline, is that?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, we have some questions about kind of how many suppliers are specifying, on their POs to. How many customers are specifying on their POs to their suppliers that, the purchase is taxable, and, how do you manage that relationship? Right. That's just an example. Yeah. But I think, going on what you guys were mentioning in terms of how COVID has changed things, I think would be quite interesting to jump on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I think it's changed things for us, internally in our organizations to work closer together in different business functions. Mm-hmm. I think also, when you look at the landscape, the world, right, there's major companies, right, major suppliers, customers out there, and each company is doing, some level of transformations, either on their purchasing side of the organization or on their billing and AR side, right? And I think the marriage between the two, there's always this kind of ebb and flow, as I mentioned before, between the two, right? So, I saw, even with it's a topic here in the U.S. where we had, Wayfair come up a few years ago, and there was a lot of discussion forums around, okay, how's Wayfair going to interact? I would say displace or maybe transform some of these interactions between customers and suppliers. I think we've seen a lot of that now, right? We've seen kind of the fallout from that legislation. I think, if you look globally, digital tax on services, that's been a big thing that's come up. I think we've seen a lot of different regulations around e-invoicing and things of that nature that companies are now having, I would say, more regulatory, reform on them in the purchasing and in the billing areas than what they've ever dealt with. So again, I think the aspect here is you want to be able to, in my mind, as long as it's not hurting you from a competitive advantage perspective, you want to be as transparent as possible as you can with your business partners, because I do think there's a lot of inefficiency that occurs just because the supplier and the customer are not always on the same page with, hey, this is what I'm, procuring, or this is the information that I have around tax. And I do think that causes some of the challenges that we see in the marketplace.
Definitely. Kristen, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think I have to agree with Les. I mean, it's almost like COVID's made everything like hyper-focused, if you will. So, jurisdictions are saying, well, we need the money faster and we want it real time. And that's, holy cow, like that's, challenging. And then, I think the level of risk has upped. I think just everyone's playing game, the playing field, if you will, has just increased. So, that's why you've got to just take a step back with these transformations and really say, all right, how do we give everyone the tools that they need to do their jobs? Because that's essentially what you're purchasing, right? If you purchase a Coupa and a Ariba, you're purchasing something that's going to help you do your jobs. Well, let's not forget about let's make sure that accounts payable has enough to do their jobs, and their jobs is not to determine what tax is calculated. And, less to your point, like it is a relationship with your supplier. You need to be talking to your supplier too, because you will have, when you implement something like this, you have an initial significant investment to do this between software and the implementation. But, the ROI is phenomenal when you start talking year 2, year 3 on efficiencies, on, making sure that you're compliant, all of those things. So, you take a look at that and really, take the time up front and partner. I said partner with as many people, as you can, especially with your tax expertise, to really make sure that you're going in eyes wide open, right? And then I think, we're just at the beginning of all of this. Like, I think, Les, you and I were talking, I think a couple months ago, and we were, you said a couple years ago when Ariba came out with their tax API, you're like, I just think we were ahead of the game and people just didn't fully understand it yet. And I was like, you know what? You're right. We're still in a very awareness, focused, immature kind of state. But I think what's really cool is as these companies grow, so are, and as we all work together more closely, I think it's going to be able to evolve. And we haven't even thought about, how can we automate this even further? What can machine learning do? What can, all of those kinds of things? And how do we factor that in? And that's what makes me really excited about all of this, and especially this topic and how we can help our clients. Caroline?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for that answer, and because I realized I took you guys a little bit cold there. But that was great. And I think we're kind of we're now sort of reaching the end of our session. So what would be great, guys, is to really help wrap us up, if you could maybe take us back to some of the key insights that you really want to share with our audience today, and are there really any kind of key questions and priorities really that our audience needs to take away right now and start getting on, like right now? So, Kristen, I'll let you take this one first, and then Les, if you want to comment on that after.
Yeah, sure. It is about, you sit on one of these presentations and you do get so much content, and, we want to jam so much into the time that we have. But when you walk away from it, it is asking, questions back to yourself, back to your organization. Are we confident that our suppliers are charging us the right sales tax? I asked that to one of our quarterly customer conferences that we had, and they were like, they just laughed. The tax people were like, no, absolutely not. So, it's things like that. It's, do you self-accrue when you aren't charged the right sales tax? How do you self-assess? Do you do that at all? Do your AP people, are they making tax decisions? It's really actually simple questions, just to kind of, if you will, qualify yourselves to say, hey, let's do an assessment. Are we really where we need to be? Or is this a more dire state, than we had expected? And I think, just simple things like that are really going to help give you some direction. And then, you can take it from there. We can get you resources to help you learn. Les, do you have anything else to add that might be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely the takeaway I would say is keep tax in focus, right? So I still see a lot of, procurement transformation proposal, RFPs come out, and maybe not even a mention of tax, right? So I do think that, for those on the phone, the audience here, keep your tax organization in focus, and involve, right? I think the most important part of that is if you involve the tax, landscape, if you will, and understand a little bit more about where the risk is, like I mentioned earlier, I think that'll give you so many valuable benefits, right? To do your transformation in a more automated way, in a more seamless way. I use seamless again. I think that's that benefit, right? Versus it's going to come up, right? And you don't want it to have to come up in your last test cycle where somebody says, "Oh, how we're not doing taxes as the way we need to." You'd rather address that head on with the transformation upfront.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there you go. There you have it, everybody. I mean, some good takeaways there. So, guys, this is all the time we have for. I'm afraid you said it yourself, Kristen. We do have a limited amount of time to cover this, and it is a huge topic. So, to our audience, I hope that we were able to answer as many questions as possible. Any questions that haven't been answered, we do apologize. We will forward these on to Kristen and Les, and Kristen and Les will do their best to try and get back to you. The recording will be made available. So if you want to watch this again, if you've got to take any notes or if you're unclear about something and want to watch this again, you will be able to. If you want to share with your colleagues, this is also an option. We are also really keen on hearing back from you guys. We want to hear your feedback, so don't forget to fill out our feedback form. And also, if you want to find out more about this topic, there is a great podcast series that is currently in our additional resources, which is called Tax Masters podcast series. And you can also obviously visit the Vertex website. So guys, Les, Kristen, thank you so much for joining me today for this session. Brilliant session. It was an absolute pleasure working with you guys. Thank you so much also to our partners Vertex for helping us put together. Valerie, Sylvia, you guys were amazing. And thank you to our audience for joining us today. I hope that you found it insightful, and we really look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care of yourselves, everybody.